I hadn't planned on starting my Sunday with an audition for a live-action episode of Family Invasion. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee, black, no sugar, because I'd finally accepted I was too old for syrupy optimism, when my doorbell decided to have a meltdown. It wasn't a polite ding-dong either. It was the kind of prolonged, frantic pressing you'd expect if someone were trying to summon an exorcist. I almost ignored it. Almost. But curiosity got the better of me, so I set my mug on the counter and walked to the door, trying to imagine what kind of emergency justified hammering on my door at 7:45 in the morning. When I pulled it open, I got my answer. There they were. My entire estranged family, arranged neatly on my porch like they were posing for the world's most uncomfortable Christmas card. My father, Charles, was eyeing the siding like he was about to declare it a structural hazard. My mother stood stiffly behind him, clutching her oversized purse to her chest like she expected me to snatch it. Michael, my older brother, favorite child, general life parasite, had one hand resting on the handle of a giant suitcase. His wife, Rebecca, was already snapping photos with her phone, probably planning to slap a "Family Time Red Heart" caption on them later, as if this was some spontaneous visit born of affection instead of entitlement. And the kids. God, the kids. Emma and Zoe were bouncing in place with matching unicorn backpacks and sticky fingers. Emma's voice cut through the morning air like a siren. "Daddy, is this our new house?" I felt my stomach flip. "Morning," I managed, my voice dry as sand. "Did you get lost on your way to literally anywhere else?" Michael didn't even flinch. He looked me up and down, his gaze lingering on my plain t-shirt and sweatpants. "Nice outfit," he sneered. "Look. We're tired. We've been driving all night. We need to come in." "Do you?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. Rebecca stepped forward, her smile stretched so tight it looked painful. "Ethan, it's been too long. We've had circumstances." She said it like she was explaining why they'd accidentally set my car on fire. "Let's not make this harder than it has to be." "Circumstances," I repeated. My heart was thumping, but I kept my tone flat. "Right. That's a new word for it." Before I could get another word out, Michael rolled his suitcase over the threshold like he just claimed my house as sovereign territory. "We're moving in," he said, like he was reading a grocery list. I blinked. "You're what?" The kids bolted past me into the living room, screeching about how big the TV was. My father followed them, giving the place the same look he'd given me when I was 16 and failed pre-calc, deep, abiding disappointment. My mother stepped around me delicately, like I might bite. "We'll get settled in the guest room," she said, not even bothering to look me in the eye. "It's just temporary. Michael can explain everything." And that was when Michael turned, set his suitcase down with a little flourish, and fixed me with the most condescending expression I'd ever seen. "You don't even have a family to worry about," he said in that tone he used to use when he'd lecture me about choices and ambition. "It makes sense for us to be here. We'll take the house." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. They hadn't come to reconnect. They'd come to take. And standing there, in my own doorway, I realized I wasn't surprised. Not really. I was just done. 3 years ago, I was the one driving across town with my life stuffed in the back seat. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. I'd been working in marketing since I was 24, nothing glamorous, but I paid my bills, kept my head above water, and occasionally even had enough left over for a halfway decent vacation. For a while, I thought that was success, stability, my name on the lease, my groceries not coming from the discount rack. Then my company got bought out by some conglomerate with a 3-syllable name and a logo that looked like a pharmaceutical side effect. They called it restructuring. I called it what it was, a polite way of saying you're expendable. I packed up my cubicle, carried my box of desk junk to the parking garage, and sat behind the wheel with my forehead resting against the steering wheel. It was the middle of January. My breath fogged up the windshield while my phone buzzed with a reminder to pay the rent. I held off calling my family as long as I could. Part of me knew how this would go. But some pathetic little hope wouldn't die. When I finally dialed my dad, He picked up on the third ring. No hello, just a flat, impatient. Yes? I cleared my throat. Dad, I lost my job. The whole department was let go. Silence. You should have saved better, he finally said. His voice was as warm as a voicemail from the IRS. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. When I called my mother, she at least tried to sound sympathetic. Oh, Ethan, that's terrible, she said, drawing out the last word like she was trying to decide if she meant it. Well, thoughts and prayers, sweetheart. Maybe you shouldn't have spent so much on takeout coffee. I didn't bother explaining that my monthly latte budget wasn't what stood between me and homelessness. And Michael, God, Michael. He didn't even pretend. At dinner that week, a dinner I should have skipped, but some masochistic impulse made me show up. He gestured at me across the table with a fork and said, It's called personal responsibility. Maybe you'll learn something this time. I should have walked out then. Instead, I sat there and listened while they all debated how I'd let this happen. Rebecca suggested I start freelancing, as if the internet was just waiting to hand me a six-figure contract. My father said I'd always been too comfortable. My mother compared me to Michael, who, according to her, had never needed help. Which was rich, considering I'd watched them pay his rent, his car note, and once, his legal fees after he rear-ended a Volvo while texting. After dessert, because apparently nothing soothes financial devastation like sugar-free apple pie, Michael cornered me in the hallway. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't look apologetic. He just said, We can't keep bailing you out. Then he walked away. That was the last real conversation I had with any of them. 2 weeks later, I got the eviction notice. I packed up my apartment alone. No one offered to help. No one called. No one checked in. I spent the next 6 months living in my car. If you've never tried to sleep in a Corolla in February, let me tell you, it teaches you things about yourself. Like how much you can endure. How low your standards can get before you stop feeling embarrassed. How quickly your body adapts to gym showers and peanut butter sandwiches. Some nights, I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about that last dinner. About the way Michael's mouth had twisted around the word bailing, like I was some irredeemable burden he'd been forced to carry. Other nights, I just tried not to think at all. But even then, freezing, humiliated, exhausted, I promised myself something. If I ever made it out, they were never getting another chance to pretend they deserved me. If you'd asked me back then how I pulled myself out, I wouldn't have had an answer. Some days, it felt like my entire life was duct taped together, one small patch over another, hoping nobody would notice how fragile it all was. It started with a LinkedIn message. Marcus, an old colleague I'd trained back when I still believed office birthday parties were a sign of a healthy culture, reached out. Hey man, he wrote. I heard what happened. I'm running a team over at Carter and Galloway. You interested in part-time? Interested? I stared at my phone so long my battery died. The next morning, I put on the least wrinkled shirt I owned, which still smelled faintly like the back seat, and went in for the interview. I didn't even have to pretend to be humble. I'd been humbled enough for 10 lifetimes. He hired me on the spot. It wasn't glamorous. I wrote ad copy for a health supplement company that sold overpriced probiotics to middle-aged women who believed gut health would solve their failing marriages. But it was something. I worked days there. At night, I bartended at a dive where half the clientele were too drunk to remember their own names, let alone mine. It wasn't unusual to finish a shift with my clothes smelling like cheap gin and regret. I'd stumble out the back door at 3 a.m., drive to the 24-hour gym, and shower before sunrise so nobody could look at me and know I didn't have a home. Every morning, I'd wake up in the driver's seat, my neck cranked at a 45-degree angle, my phone buzzing with overdraft notifications and promotional emails from credit card companies I couldn't pay. But slowly, like watching paint dry, things started to change. I saved enough to get out of the car. Just a tiny shared apartment above a pawn shop with a roommate, Stephanie, who only asked that I not eat her yogurt and keep my existential crises confined to my half of the living room. After the first night there, I lay flat on the mattress, an actual mattress, not a foam pad, and cried until I felt stupid for it. 6 months later, Marcus pulled me into his office. "You've been killing yourself for peanuts," he said. "I'm bumping you to full-time. Benefits. More money. You've earned it. Benefits." I almost laughed out loud. I'd spent so long in survival mode I'd forgotten health insurance was even real. I still bartended on weekends, habit mostly. It felt safer knowing I had extra income in case the universe decided to slap me around again. But for the first time in years, I felt like I had traction. Like the road ahead wasn't just an endless skid. A year in, I got promoted to marketing manager. My name went on a door. It wasn't a big office, just a closet with a window that wouldn't open, but it was mine. Every time I walked in, I'd touch the plaque like it might vanish if I stopped appreciating it. On my lunch breaks, I'd watch people in suits walk past the building and think, you don't know how close I came to disappearing. But I didn't. I was still here. And if nothing else, that felt like a start. It's funny how quickly survival mode can start to feel permanent. Even after I'd been in that apartment for over a year, part of me still flinched every time the mail came. Like I expected a letter to materialize saying, "Just kidding, go back to your car." But life has a way of creeping forward whether you trust it or not. I got promoted again, team lead this time. My boss called it a natural progression. I called it proof that not everyone was waiting for me to fail. With the new title came more money, enough that I started to let myself imagine something beyond just scraping by. I opened a separate savings account. I called it the escape fund, even though no one knew what I was escaping from but me. Month by month, I watched the balance grow. I still bartended a few nights a week, partly because the tips were good, mostly because the version of me who lived in a Corolla didn't trust stability. The day I realized I had enough for a down payment, I sat in the break room at work and stared at the number on my phone until my vision blurred. I'd done it. No cosigner. No handouts. No begging anyone to vouch for me. Just me. I toured 12 houses before I found the one. 2 bedrooms, a tiny office, and a backyard just big enough to pretend I knew something about landscaping. The realtor kept asking if I wanted to call a spouse or a parent for input. I smiled and said no every time. When we sat down to sign the papers, she passed me the folder with all the seriousness of someone bestowing an ancient relic. "Congratulations," she said. "You're a homeowner." I don't think she understood that this was more than a transaction. This was the first thing I'd ever owned that no one could take credit for, or take away. The day I moved in, Marcus and Stephanie showed up with boxes, cheap pizza, and a bottle of grocery store champagne. We sat on the bare living room floor, toasting with mismatched mugs. "To the man who did it all himself," Marcus said, raising his glass. "And didn't let the bastards break him." Stephanie clinked hers against mine. "Here's to never having to sleep in a Corolla again." I laughed, even though my chest felt tight. Because I knew, right then, that this house was more than walls and a roof. It was proof. Proof that I wasn't the cautionary tale my family expected me to become. That I didn't need their approval to matter. That I didn't owe them a damn thing. It started like a bad dream, the kind you think is over until you blink and realize you're still stuck inside it. I'd been in my office, drinking coffee and enjoying the quiet hum of a life I'd built on my own terms. I was half listening to a podcast about restoring old houses when I heard it, thumping in the hallway. Not a polite knock. Not hesitant footsteps. Just thumping, like someone was trying to stomp the foundation right out from under me. When I walked out, my living room looked like the set of some grim sitcom. Emma was standing on my couch, TV remote held aloft like she was about to knight herself. Zoe had draped my throw blanket around her shoulders and was marching in circles chanting, "This is ours!" My mother was in the kitchen with her head in my fridge, rearranging things like she owned the place. Rebecca hovered near the window, phone in hand, snapping pictures from every angle. She gave me that bright, hollow smile that always made me feel like an inconvenient stranger. Michael came in last, rolling 2 massive suitcases over the threshold as though this were a hotel he'd forgotten to check into. He paused, surveyed the space, then turned to me with the same smirk he'd worn the day he told me to figure it out. Nice setup, he said, casual, as if he just discovered a vacation rental he planned to review later. We'll be more comfortable here. I blinked. More comfortable? Than where? Rebecca didn't miss a beat. Oh, you didn't hear? She tucked her phone away like she just documented an estate sale. Michael lost his job. Your father's business went under. Our lease expired. We have nowhere else to go. She said it like she was explaining a minor scheduling conflict, not an uninvited occupation. My father followed them in, carrying a duffel bag that probably cost more than my first car. He didn't look at me. He just set the bag by the stairs, straightened his collar, and announced, "We'll take the basement. It's the most sensible arrangement." Sensible. That word rattled around in my head, knocking loose memories I'd spent years trying to bury. Me, sleeping in a Corolla behind the gym, praying no one would see the fogged-up windows. Me, counting out coins to buy peanut butter. Me, staring at my phone, waiting for any of them to call. I pressed a hand against the doorframe to steady myself. "I'm sorry, you'll what?" Michael looked up, expression so casual it was almost insulting. "Ethan, be reasonable. You don't even have a family. You have all this space. It's only fair." Fair. Like I'd stumbled into a board meeting about my own house and missed the agenda. Rebecca sighed, her tone softening into a performative concern. "We've had a hard year. You can't expect us to live in a motel." "Why not?" I asked. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. "People do it all the time." Emma hopped off the couch and grabbed my arm. "Daddy says we're going to live here forever," she chirped like it was the best adventure she could imagine. My stomach twisted. My father was already unzipping his bag, as if the matter had been settled before they even knocked. Michael stepped closer, lowering his voice into that rehearsed seriousness he always used to make me feel small. "Ethan, you owe us. After everything the family did." I laughed, short, sharp, more bark than humor. "After everything you did for me?" His face darkened. "We looked out for you when you were young." "Right," I said. "And when I needed help, you told me to figure it out." Rebecca folded her arms. "You're really going to hold that over everyone's heads? It's not like we had a choice." I looked around, at the suitcases on my floor, the kids tracking dirt on my rug, my mother critiquing my groceries, and felt something go cold and clean inside me. They hadn't come to ask. They'd come to claim. And I wasn't afraid of them anymore. The thing no one tells you about betrayal is how quiet it gets once you stop trying to argue with it. I watched them, my family, make themselves at home like it was the most natural thing in the world. My father settled into the armchair he'd criticized as tacky the last time he visited. Michael unzipped a suitcase and started unloading clothes right onto my couch. For a few seconds, I actually wondered if this was a test. Like maybe there was a hidden camera and someone would pop out yelling, "Gotcha!" But no. This was real. I took a slow breath, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "You can't stay here," I said. Michael didn't even look up from folding his shirts. "Ethan, don't be ridiculous." Ridiculous. That was rich, coming from the man who just turned up at my front door with half a moving truck. "You can't expect us to go to a hotel," Rebecca chimed in, her voice sugary and brittle. "Think of the kids." I almost laughed. I'd spent 6 months thinking of myself as less than nothing while I lived in a Corolla, and no one had so much as sent me a text. Now, suddenly, we were a collective? I held up a hand. "I'm serious. You need to leave. Tonight." My mother turned from the kitchen, clutching a jar of my coffee beans like she discovered some exotic artifact. "Ethan," she sighed, "you're being selfish. This is what family does. We help each other." I stared at her. "When exactly did you help me?" Silence. Michael stood up, set the shirts down, and crossed his arms. "You have no idea what we've been through," he said. "Dad lost everything. I'm between jobs. You've got this big house you barely use. It's just logical." Logical again. The word was starting to feel like an inside joke I wasn't in on. I pressed my palm flat against the wall, just to feel something steady, and said, I'm going to ask you one more time. Leave. Michael's jaw tightened. No. And that was the moment I knew they weren't bluffing. They genuinely believed they could just move in, squat, and wear me down. I didn't bother arguing anymore. I walked back to my office, shut the door, and pulled out my phone. First, I called Nathan. His voice was groggy. He worked night shifts at the ER, but when I explained, he was instantly awake. Stay calm, he said. They're banking on you panicking. I'll be there in half an hour. Next, I called Marcus. He'd always been the practical one. He answered on the second ring. You need me to look up tenancy laws? He asked. Yeah, I said. And maybe a good locksmith. Stephanie picked up on the first try. Want me to come over? Please. By the time I put my phone down, my hands were shaking. Not with fear, exactly, more like a kind of adrenaline I hadn't felt since the day I signed my mortgage papers. The adrenaline that comes when you realize you're about to draw a line that can't be erased. I walked back into the living room. Everyone was still there. Still pretending this was reasonable. I didn't bother speaking to them again. I went straight to my bedroom, locked the door, and started gathering anything important, my documents, my laptop, a few personal things I wasn't about to leave lying around. Then I checked the locks on every window and turned on the audio recording app on my phone. If they were going to force a confrontation, I wasn't going to let them spin it later. While I worked, my mind kept drifting back to the last time I'd asked them for help. To Michael's text, "We can't keep bailing you out." Funny how quickly the story changes when they're the ones drowning. I zipped my backpack closed, sat on the edge of the bed, and waited. Because this time, I wasn't the one who was going to fold. When Nathan arrived, he didn't bother knocking. He let himself in with the spare key I'd given him 2 years ago, the one I'd never given to anyone in my family. He walked straight to my bedroom, found me sitting there, backpack in my lap, and nodded like he already knew. You ready? Ready as I'm going to be. I followed him out. The living room was a war zone of luggage and entitlement. My father was sitting in my armchair, flipping through the channels like he was waiting for room service. My mother had made herself a cup of tea. Michael and Rebecca were perched on the couch, murmuring to each other, their kids sprawled on the rug watching cartoons. They all looked up when I walked in, but nobody moved. Nathan didn't say a word. He just stood behind me, arms folded, like backup in a western. I took a slow breath. My voice came out steady, calmer than I expected. I'm going to say this once, I said. And then I'm done. Michael opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. No. You don't get to interrupt me. Not this time. He closed his mouth, and for the first time in my life, he actually looked unsure. When I lost my job, I began. I called you. I looked at my father. I called all of you. And you told me to figure it out. I turned to Michael. You told me we couldn't keep bailing me out. Like I was some stray dog you'd taken in. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably. My mother set her cup down, her lips pressed into a tight line. For 6 months I lived in my car, I said. I showered at a gym. I scraped together enough money to keep my phone on in case someone, anyone, bothered to call. And none of you did. I paused, letting the silence stretch long enough that even the kids went quiet. But now you lose your house, and suddenly I'm supposed to hand over everything I've built? My voice cracked, just a little, but I didn't care. No. I won't. My father's eyes narrowed. We are your family. Are you? I asked, and it came out softer than I expected. Because family doesn't disappear when it's inconvenient. Family doesn't show up uninvited to take what doesn't belong to them. Michael stood up, his face flushing red. Ethan, be rational. You don't even have a family. That's right. I cut in. Because I stopped mistaking you for one. Rebecca looked at Michael like he might stop me, but he just stood there, hands balled into fists. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the spare house key they'd left behind years ago, the one my mother had slipped onto my key ring without asking. I held it up between 2 fingers. This, I said, was a courtesy. A gesture. Not an invitation. Then I set it down on the coffee table. I'm asking you to leave. Right now. If you don't, I'll call the police. And I promise you, I will press charges. The words hung there like a thunderclap. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. Not pity. Not guilt. Just relief. Nathan stepped forward. You heard him, he said quietly. Go. For a second, I thought Michael might explode. But he didn't. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, and didn't recognize what he saw. Without another word, I turned and walked to the front door. I opened it wide, the cold air spilling in. If you need somewhere to stay, I said. I'm sure there are motels that take walk-ins. Nobody moved. So I looked at Michael and gave him the same line he'd texted me 3 years ago. Figure it out. Then I walked away, left them standing there in the house they were never going to own. They left in a slow, stunned procession. No one said goodbye. No one tried to hug me. Michael dragged the suitcases out with the same wounded dignity as a dethroned monarch. My father paused in the doorway, like he was about to deliver some final condemnation, but all he managed was a quiet, seething glare. When the last of them stepped outside, I shut the door and turned the lock. The silence afterward felt massive. It settled over me like a weighted blanket, heavy but somehow comforting. I stood there, hands still on the doorknob, trying to feel regret. Trying to find that familiar ache in my chest, the one that always followed any confrontation with them. But it wasn't there. Instead, there was just relief. About an hour later, my phone started buzzing. First, a text from Michael. You'll regret this. When you're old and alone, remember you chose to turn your back on your family. I stared at the screen, then set the phone face down on the counter. A voicemail followed, my mother's voice trembling with theatrical heartbreak. Ethan, please. We don't have anywhere to go. This isn't who you are. You're better than this. I deleted it without listening to the rest. Then came the calls from extended relatives, people who hadn't spoken to me in years but suddenly felt qualified to weigh in. Aunt Marjorie left me a message full of disappointment, her voice quivering like she'd personally been evicted. Ethan, your parents did their best. You owe them respect. But then, 20 minutes later, came a different voicemail, from Aunt Martha, who never had much patience for anyone's nonsense. All due respect to your mother, she drawled. But I told her she was full of it. You did the right thing. You don't let people take advantage of you. Proud of you. I saved that one. Nathan stayed with me the whole afternoon. He made grilled cheese and poured us 2 glasses of cheap bourbon he'd brought over. We sat in my kitchen, eating like it was any other day. He raised his glass. To courage, he said. I clinked mine against his. To finally being free. My phone buzzed again. More texts, more guilt, more attempts to claw their way back into my head. I didn't read them. I already knew exactly what they'd say. That I was heartless. That I'd betrayed them. That I'd be sorry. But the truth was, I'd spent years being sorry. Sorry I wasn't who they wanted. Sorry I couldn't give more. Sorry I ever believed their approval was the same as love. And now? Now I was done apologizing. I walked through the house after Nathan left, touching the walls, the doorframes, the little details I'd picked out myself, the framed photo in the hall, the lamp I'd carried home in the rain, the dent in the baseboard I'd accidentally made the day I moved in. This place was mine. I wasn't going to let them take it. And I wasn't going to let them take the person I'd become either. The next morning, I woke up to a house that finally felt like mine again. No half-unpacked suitcases. No kids stomping around the living room. No voices arguing in low, urgent whispers. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint creak of the floorboards when I walked to the kitchen. I made coffee. Real coffee, strong, scalding, a little too bitter. The way I liked it. While it brewed, I pulled up the list I'd been avoiding for months, all the loose ends I'd never tied up because some part of me still believed my family might change. First, I updated my emergency contacts. I deleted my father's number from every form, every login. Replaced it with Nathan's. Then I put Stephanie and Marcus in the secondary slots. It felt small, but final. Like erasing a name off a door you no longer needed to knock on. Next, I boxed up the spare linens and towels they'd used, even though they'd only been here a day. It felt symbolic, clearing out the residue of entitlement. I didn't do it angry. I did it because the space needed to breathe again. Later that afternoon, I walked the property line, just to remind myself how far I'd come. The grass was still patchy, the fence needed a fresh coat of paint, and the mailbox leaned a little to the left. But it was mine. All of it. I thought about who I'd been 3 years ago, tired, scared, desperate for a scrap of validation. The version of me who'd have let them in without question, just for the chance to feel accepted. That man was gone. And good riddance. When I came back inside, I opened the last voicemail Michael had sent before I blocked his number. His voice was taut with anger, and something that sounded suspiciously like fear. "You'll be sorry when you realize you don't have anyone left." I played it twice. Then I hit delete. Because he was wrong. I had plenty of people left. Just not them. That evening, I invited Marcus and Stephanie over for pizza. Nathan came by, too, carrying a 6-pack and that look he always got when he was proud of me but didn't want to embarrass me by saying it out loud. We ate in the kitchen. No fancy speeches. No drama. Just laughter and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd stood my ground. At one point, Stephanie raised her glass. "To Ethan," she said. "To not letting the past walk in the front door." "To Ethan," Nathan echoed, clinking bottles. I looked around the table, at the people who'd shown up when no one else had, and felt something settle in my chest. Peace. After they left, I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching the porch light glow against the dark. I thought about every time I'd wondered if I was worth anything without their approval. I knew the answer now. I didn't need their permission to exist. I didn't need their blessing to be happy. And I didn't need to keep the door unlocked for people who'd never once knocked out of love. When I finally turned off the light, it felt like closing a chapter I'd been stuck in too long. The boy they abandoned needed them. The man I became doesn't. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough.